Hello, I'm Greg, and this is part 2 of my series on how to write Defender in Unity. So, if you want to learn how to write a game from scratch in Unity, grab your favorite beverage, pull up a chair, and follow along as I teach you how to write Defender in Unity. So in part 1, we got Unity installed, we created our project, we imported some assets, we created our title screen, which you see here. We began implementing our input system, which we can now have move, fire, thrust, flip direction, and start input. We'll be adding smart bombs and hyperspace to that as well. And we began implementing our main game scene. We brought in our mountains, which will scroll left and right as we fly. And we've got that wired up to the input system. We have our player ship. I will demonstrate that here as I click play. You can see I can move up and down. I can thrust. I can flip directions. One thing I did want to address, the thrusting with the gamepad is a little glitchy. I have to push the stick in exactly the right place in order to get it to thrust. That's not a problem with the keyboard controls, but I want to address that really quickly. If we go into our input script here and open that up in the editor, we're checking to see if we're thrusting by seeing if the x-axis on our thrust input on that right stick is all the way to the right. We're basically looking for a value of 1. And if I'm pushing a little bit up or a little bit down and not just completely to the right, this will fail. So I'm going to change this, and I'm just going to check to see if the thrust input .x is greater than or equal to 0.5. We switch back into Unity and hit play again. I expect that it's going to be a lot more responsive. Yeah, it's much more forgiving now. Okay, the other thing I want to do, right now the ship is always in the middle of the screen. If you've ever played the original Defender, you'll know that when he changes directions, the camera will pan. So if we go and take a look at our camera here, I'm going to expand this game screen a little bit here. The camera can pan. So if I'm facing left, I want the camera to pan so that the ship is right of center. And if he's facing the other direction, I want it to pan so that he's left of center. And so it looks like a value of 5, maybe a value of 4 and -4 would be good. Maybe even not that much. I think -3 and 3 would look good. So that way, not only does it look better, but it benefits the player because it will give him more time to react to whatever he's flying towards. So let's go and see how we can implement that. So we're going to keep our camera selected here. We're going to go into our scripts folder. And I'm just going to right-click, create, C# script. And I'm going to call this Camera Position Manager. And since I'm calling it a manager, I'm going to drag it into the managers folder. And let's double click that to open it up in the editor. And I'll zoom in. So let's create a couple of serialized fields. The first one is going to be a vector 3. I'm actually going to have 2 vector 3s here. I'm going to have left position and right position. And I'm going to create a float. I'm going to call this lerp speed. So lerp stands for linear interpolation. And basically, we want the camera to kind of smoothly move to the new position. Every time the ship flips direction, we don't want the camera to just suddenly jerk over to the opposite position. We want it to kind of smoothly lerp there. Now in our awake method, we're going to cache our transform. So we'll say transform, let's see, transform equals transform, and game manager equals find object of type game manager. And the reason we want the game manager is we want to be able to get our player ship so we can tell what direction the ship is facing. So I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to create that field, transform. And then I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to create field game manager. And then down here, I'm going to declare player ship, and I'm going to use an expression body method to get the player ship off of our game manager. Okay, so we've got our transform, we have our game manager, and we have access to our player ship. This is going to be a very simple script. We're going to use a late update method. So late update is called every frame if the behavior is enabled. And this will happen after update and fixed update. So we're going to say if we don't have a player ship, then we're just going to return and not do anything. Otherwise, we're going to figure out what our desired position is going to be based on what direction the player ship is facing. So we'll say var desired position equals player ship dot direction is greater than 0. So he's facing right, because remember 1 is right and -1 is left. Then we're going to want to move the camera to the left position. Otherwise, we're going to move the camera to the right position. So this is a ternary expression. I covered this in the previous video. This is essentially, if this condition is true, use this value. Otherwise, use this value. All right. Let's put an if statement here. And we're going to get the distance from our desired position to our current position. So we're getting our position off of the transform. If we're saying that is greater than float.epsilon, epsilon is just a tiny value. So if that is true, if this is greater than almost at the target, then we're going to say our transform.position equals vector3.lerp. So we're going to use the lerp function on the vector3 class. It says it will linearly interpolate between 2 points, and we're going to give it our current position. So we're going from our current position to our desired position, and then we're going to give it basically how fast we want that interpolation to happen. We're going to use our lerp speed, and we're going to multiply that times time.delta time so that it's independent of our frame rate. All right. And that is it for this script. So let's go back out into Unity. And we're going to add that script to our main camera. And now we want to set our default values for that left position and right position. So for left, we want it to be 3 on the X, 0 on the Y. We're not changing the Y. And then the camera is already at -10 on the Z axis, so we want to keep that. And then the right position will be -3, 0, -10. And our lerp speed, I'm going to turn that all the way down to 3. Let's go ahead and hit play and see what happens. Okay, so that looks pretty good. The only thing I didn't like was when the game first started, it kind of jerked over from its start position to that other position. Yeah, I don't like that. So we want the ship's start position to be 3, 0, -10. So we can fix that. If we go into our main camera and we just set it right off the bat to be 3, 0, -10, we'll save our scene and hit play. It should start facing to the right and panned over. So there we go. I like that. The next thing I'd like to do is stub out our user interface a little bit, just to get our scoreboard and things up there. So I'm going to right-click, create empty, and I'm going to call this dash 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 UI, and I'm going to right-click, create empty, and I'm going to call this scoreboard. And I'm going to add a canvas to that. And we're going to go into here and change this to scale with screen size, and we're going to use our reference resolution of 1920 by 1080 to match the size of our game window up here. And I want to create an area to display the number of lives that we have remaining. So under our canvas, I will right-click, create empty, and I will call this lives. And we're going to give this something called a horizontal layout group. So I'm going to say horizontal layout group. And I'm going to want a little bit of space in between items. I want the child alignment to be middle left. We're going to want to use child scale and then child force expand to be true. And then we need to actually have something to display in there. So if you remember, under our sprites, we go into our art folder, and under our Defender sprites, I'm going to increase this here. If I scroll down to where we saw our player ship, there's this guy here. I think that this is what we're going to use for our player life. So under lives here, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go down to UI and I'm going to select image. And you can see it creates a blank image there. It gave it a canvas renderer. What we're going to do is here where it says source image, we're going to drag that guy in there. And that looks pretty horrendous. So up here, I'm going to make its height only 50. I think that looks better. Now let's see if I rename this to player life. If I duplicate this, you see we get two of them. We duplicate it again. Now we've got 3. So this is what we're going to use to display how many lives the player has remaining. So we're going to go up to our lives here and we're going to hit Alt Shift and we're going to click this little left section here to anchor it up to the left. That's not exactly where I want it to be. So I'm going to move that a little bit. I'll select the move tool here, shrink this down a little bit and double click on this to see it in our scene view. And I'm just going to grab this and move it down a little bit and then move it to the right a little bit. Maybe up just a tad more. And actually, before I get too much farther on this, I think I want to change the scale a little bit too. It looks a little bit big to me, so I'm going to make this 0.75, 0.75. And I want to put up our overlay that we're going to have. That will also help us to arrange these things. But before I do that, I want to go up here to UI, and I want to put this on the UI layer. And I'll say, yes, change children. So now all of these guys should be on the UI layer. All right, so I want to create our overview panel. So up here under UI, I will right click, create empty, and I will call this overview panel. And I'm going to create a new canvas under there. And as per usual, I'm going to want to change this from constant pixel size to scale with screen size. Set our reference resolution to 1920 by 1080. All right. So then under our canvas here, you can right click, UI, image, And I'm going to go all the way up here and collapse this Defender Sprites and then scroll down to our overview panel. I'm going to drag that overview panel image and drop it over here to source image. And that looks very, very small, as you can see. I'm going to go up here to the rect transform, open that up, and I'm going to hold down Shift and Alt, and I'm going to click right here. And that is pretty much what we want. I think I might make it a little bit taller. So let me come down to the, collapse this here and go down to the height. Maybe I will increase the height a little bit. I think I like that a little bit better. And then that helps give me an idea of how I want these lives to be positioned. And if you remember the original Defender, the lives were up a little bit higher over here. You had your smart bombs displayed over here, and then your score displayed over here. So I want to move the lives up some. So I'm going to make sure I have the move tool selected. I'm going to move them up a little bit like that, maybe just a little bit to the left. And then the next thing we're going to add is we're going to add our smart bombs, which is going to have a vertical layout group over here. And then we're going to have our score, which will be over here to the left. So going back to our scoreboard here, we've got this player life object. We're going to create a prefab from that because we're going to have the scoreboard script actually spawn these as children of this lives component when we actually start implementing the gameplay. But for now, let's just go into our prefabs folder. I will shrink this down so I just see names. I'll right click, create folder. I will call this UI. And I'll open that up, and then I will drag this guy in as a prefab. And we'll just leave these all in here for now, just so we can use it for reference purposes as we lay things out. Now we want to go and create a new object. So we've got our lives here. The next thing we want is our score. So I will create empty, and I will call that score. And then I'm going to create another empty, and I'm going to call it smart bombs. And I'm going to go into the smart bombs folder first, or not folder, but in the smart bombs node first. And we want to add a vertical layout group to it. So we've got a horizontal layout group on this guy. This guy's going to have a vertical layout group. So we'll say vertical layout group. And I think we want to use child scale for width and height. This is probably fine. For spacing, I think I'm only going to go with 2. And I think we want to grow from the bottom up. So I'm going to say that it's going to start at lower center. And now we need something to put in there for our smart bomb indicator. Now before I do that though, I want to go into our art folder and into our Defender Sprites, and I want to change this pixels per unit from 100 to 75. I just want these sprites to be a little bit bigger. And then we're going to go under our smart bombs here. I'm going to right click UI image. And for our source sprite, we're going to expand our Defender Sprites, and I'm going to drag this over so we can see those images in there. Scroll down until I see our bomb, and I'm just going to drag that into there for our smart bomb. And I'm thinking that's a little bit too big. Let's give it a width of 50 and a height of 25. That's probably pretty good. We might adjust that later. And then if we duplicate this, because we've got this vertical layout group, we should see that they are vertically aligned like that. I want to rename this to Smart Bomb. And we're going to drag that down into our UI prefab folder, like so. And now I want to reposition these. So I'm going to go into our rect transform and hit Alt-Shift and hit that. And I don't want it, actually I'm going to just put it in the center. And then I'm going to drag it like that. Now let me see what happens if I resize our screen to something like that. That looks pretty good. Yeah, so that should handle if we were to resize the screen to different, or play it on a device with different resolutions. I want to bring it down a little bit though, to about there. And then it will grow from the bottom. So if I delete that and delete that, so you can see how they kind of grow. And I think I'm actually going to delete this. I'm going to recreate. I'm going to use a UI Text Mesh Pro. And I'm going to call this score. And I'm going to say Alt-Shift-Left. And we're going to give it a value of 00 to start with. And for our font, if you remember, we're going to use our Arcade SDF font. So I'll drag that into here. And for our font size, 36 is probably okay for now. I want the color to be yellow. And let me just drag it and bring it down here. I'm actually going to increase this font size to be something like 128 maybe. And what happens if we add more digits to that? So what we want to do is we want this to be right aligned, centered, with no wrapping. And let's go ahead and drag this back down. Drag that over there. I think that looks good. And so maybe just a little bit farther to the left. I think I like that for our score. I am going to move it up above the smart bombs. Not that it really makes a difference. It's just that we have lives, score, smart bombs. And I think that looks pretty good for our basic UI. One other thing I'd like to do, I'm looking at our background here, and I'd like to have a little bit more detail from these mountains. So if I go up to our background node, I'm going to scale this up on the y-axis, and then I need to move it up some. So let's just hold down the Alt key and start moving that up. I think that looks a little bit better. You can see those peaks a little bit more. Another minor little detail I'd like to take care of is on the game manager, I want it to play a sound when the game starts. So let's go into our game manager script, and we're going to add another serialized field. So we've got our playership prefab. I'm going to add one. It's going to be an audio clip, and we're going to call this start sound. And when we start the game, I basically want to play that start sound. So what we're going to do, we're going to actually create a new component called a sound manager. So for now, I'm just going to say sound manager.instance.play audio clip start sound. And of course, sound manager does not exist. So I'm going to come up to the top of my class here, and I'm going to say public class sound manager. And we can make that derived from mono behavior. This will be a singleton, so we're going to have a public static sound manager instance. And we can make this a property, so it will be a public getter and a private setter. And then in our awake method, we will say if instance is not equal to null and instance is not equal to this, then we want to destroy the game object and return. Otherwise, we want to assign this to that instance. So there's our singleton instance. The other thing I want to do is I want to say require component type of audio source. And then in our wake, after we assign instance to this, we will say audio source equals get component audio source. And I will create this field. So we've got our private audio source field there. Now the other thing we're going to want to do is add a play audio clip method. So we go back into here, you'll see that it wants to call play audio clip and it doesn't exist. So we'll create that function. So we have a public void play audio clip, and we'll just call this clip, and then we're going to add another parameter which will be volume, and we'll default that to 1. So if we don't specify volume, it will play at the maximum volume. And all we're going to do in here is say audio source play one shot clip volume. Clip comma volume. And then we're going to move this into its own class. So move to soundmanager.cs. Okay, so we have this class. It's in our managers folder. If we jump out of the editor and go into the Unity editor, and we look down here in our managers folder, you see it has added a sound manager. So up here, under managers, I'm going to create empty. I'm going to call that sound manager. And then I'm going to drag the sound manager script onto it. And you see it already gave it an audio source. And we don't want it to play on awake. Now we need to assign our start sound to the game manager. So if we go look at that, you can see we've got this start sound field, but we haven't assigned anything to it. So let's go back into our sounds. And we have this Defender start. I'm going to turn my audio down. I realized in the first video that my sound effects were a little loud. So if we hit this and hit play, I'm going to turn that way down. Turn that down some more. Okay, I'm going to drag that into our game manager, start sound. And let's see what happens when I hit play. Okay, now let's see what happens when we go to the title scene and start from there. Oh, we got a null reference exception. So we can pretty clearly see what this is going to be. If we go into our game manager script here where the error occurred, you can see it's blowing up where we're trying to access the sound manager. And that's because we never added the sound manager to the title scene. So when it's trying to call this, it doesn't exist yet. So what we can do to fix that is, you remember our bootstrapper? We can actually put the user input and the sound manager under a resource. We can add a prefab that will be, we'll call it managers, or maybe we'll just call it, what do we want to call that? I have to come up with a name for it. I think I'm just going to call it persistent objects or persistent components. And then when this bootstrapper loads it, it'll load our user input and the sound manager at the same time. So let's go back and see how we refactor that. So in our title scene right now, we have these things here. And then we have our bootstrapper, which the script for it is under managers. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to take that sound manager that we created in the game scenes. Let's go back to our main scene. And we've got this sound manager here. I'm actually going to create a prefab from that. So I'm going to go into our prefabs, and we're going to call this managers, and drag that sound manager into there. And then, so in our resources, if you remember, we've got this user input. I'm actually going to move that into the prefabs folder. And then I'm going to create a new prefab. I'm going to create a new empty here. I'm going to call this persistent components. And then we're going to drag our sound manager into there, and we're going to drag our user input into there. And then we're going to drag this whole thing into the resources folder. So now I just want to type rename so that I can copy that value. And we'll go back into our Bootstrapper script. So we'll go into Scripts, Managers, Bootstrapper. And here, instead of loading user input, we're going to load persistent components. And we're going to call this, I'm just going to call it Bootstrap Prefab. And then we're going to name it persistent components. And we'll call don't destroy unload on that guy. That should take care of what we need. It doesn't like the fact that that's spelled bootstrapper. It wants me to rename it to be bootstrapper with a capital P, a capital. Oh, no, I actually did misspell it. Will that fix it? I think that fixes it. I thought it was complaining about the casing. And it wants me to short circuit this if statement. Okay, let's run the game and see what happens now. Oh, but we want to delete that. Let me go back to that. Go back to our title scene. So we should have no sound manager. We should have no input manager. Let's just hit run. I'm going to hit pause under don't destroy unload. We've got persistent components. We've got a sound manager, and we've got our user input. And there we go. Well, I think I'm going to call that a wrap for this video. I had a marathon video in the first episode. It was over 2 hours long, and I want to try and keep these to a more manageable length. But if you prefer long videos over short videos, or if you prefer short videos over long videos, drop a comment down below, and I'll do my best to try and accommodate what you all want. And if you have any questions about anything that I covered, or suggestions, again, drop a comment. I do my best to respond to all comments. And if you found this useful, and I really hope that you did, do me a favor and click the like and subscribe button. It really does help me to grow my channel and motivate me to make more tutorials. And if you have any detailed questions, like if you get stuck trying to implement any of this, pop over to my Discord server and give a more detailed question, maybe paste in some screenshots of what you're experiencing, and then I can give a more detailed, more helpful answer than I can in a YouTube comment. Well, I really do appreciate you all tuning in, so thanks so much for watching, and good luck on your game development journey.